We have Bryan Helmkamp here from New York. He's going to be talking about Webrat.
Cool. All right. How's that? We good? Okay. Thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited to be able to speak here, especially for those of you who are kind enough to vote for my submission. It was what really let me make the trip out here at all. So I'm really happy that you guys wanted to see it, and I'll do my best to give you a good talk. I think it's really cool you're recording this, by the way. I just need to say hi, Mom. Okay. So just trying to gauge the audience to know what I should cover. How many people here are familiar with Webrat, have heard of it at least, seen something about it? Oh, wow. That's really good. Okay. How many people here are using Webrat actively? Okay, cool. So I'd say that might have been 25%, a third. Okay, the rest of you guys, why not? All right, we'll get to that later. So you should be using Webrat. That's the whole reason I'm here. I'm very biased, but I think I'm also very right that Webrat is an awesome tool that everyone should be using who is writing a web application in Ruby. Just to sort of save some time for the end, it doesn't run on the iPhone, it's not written in Scala, and there's no porn. Okay, so who am I? My name is Bryan Helmkamp. I'm the maintainer of Webrat. I work at a company called WePlay in New York. It's the online home of youth sports. I want to thank Ilya for the brilliant idea to put the footer on the slides, so I stole that blatantly from him. But this is where the slides are going to be posted. This is my Twitter and the Webrat IRC chat room, and this is my blog. Okay, so this part I call the beer disclaimer. And the beer disclaimer is that my time is limited, and every time I see someone talk about testing, I'm always sitting in my seat stewing because I'm like, man, they're not covering that with enough detail. There are all sorts of issues they're glossing over which are important for people to understand, and I'm totally going to do that too. But we have beer to fix this, so when you think that, sort of either save it for the end for questions, or if we run out of time, I'm going to be in San Francisco until Sunday. I'll be hanging out after the conference. So find me and let's talk about dive into the details of these topics even more. Okay, so this is a website you might have heard of called GitHub. They host code, and they've got a form to create a new repository. It's got a name field, a description, a URL. Those are optional. And you want to test this because you want to make sure that it works when you ship it the first time and also have the confidence that it continues to work as your application grows. How do you do that? If you're writing a Rails integration test, this is one way to do it. This is about what I would need to feel confident that it works in this style. You start off at the beginning and you need to hit the repositories path. That's just the page that the user is going to start on. And you want to make sure that there's actually a link to this thing, because if there's no link to it, no one can use it anyway. Once you've verified that the link is there, you've got to make a separate request for the new repositories path, and you need to make sure that the form is actually correct on it. If the form has the wrong method or the wrong URL or any of those attribute names are incorrect, any of these right here, the form will not work. So you need to verify all of that stuff to make sure your form's hooked up correctly. And then finally, you do a post to the repositories path with the attributes that define the repository you're trying to create. And as you can see, is this blatant duplication between these parameters and these attributes up here. So each step along the way, you also have to verify that the HTTP response code was what you were expecting. And finally, you do all that, you're able to write a assert statement to make sure that the text is on the page. This is the same test written with Webrat. So we'll do that one more time. This Webrat code does as much, and I would say more than, the code on the previous slide. I also like to think it's a little bit more readable, expressive, and easier to maintain. Webrat was originally written by a guy named Seth Fitzsimmons, who was here yesterday. Actually, he had to take off today, when we worked together at East Media in New York. And what it is a tool to simulate requests to a web application at a basic level in a way that a browser might. So the most important piece of this is like actually navigating through the website by visiting pages and clicking on links and then filling out forms. That's actually, when you break it down, about like 95% of all the interactions a person's going to have with a typical web application. So Webrat behaves like a browser. What we do is we start by using visit. This is the Webrat equivalent method to somebody sort of opening their browser, typing in the Firefox URL bar where they want to go, and then they land on a page. So Webrat makes the request, and it verifies that the page load is successful. From there, you can click a link based on the text in the link, the inner text. It does this using no GoGaRu. So when it gets the response back, it parses it. I think it's lazy about the parsing, but it looks at those DOM elements and is able to make these things work based on that. There's no HTML unit true browser behind it in the traditional Webrat form. We'll get into some of the ways that that might be a simplistic statement later in the talk. But once you've done that, you're on the right page. Now you can fill in the name of the repository. In this case, with rack test is the new repository I'm going to create. You can click the button create. Upon clicking the button, that's actually what makes the request for the next page. That does the post to the repository's path with the appropriate parameters. And then finally, because the pages are all stored in the test instance as we go, we can do an assertion on the response on the page. So how easy is it to get started with Webrat? This is about it. This is all you need if you're using Rails integration testing, which comes in the box since like Rails as far as I can remember. You do a config gem line in your environment's test RB. This is just the current Webrat version. You add a webrat.configure block to your test helper RB. And then this line here will just invoke the Rails gem dependency management system to ensure that the appropriate version of Webrat is installed. From that point, you're good to go. Like, you can use those methods that I was showing in that test with just that much work. So what sort of methods can you use? This is Webrat's core API, is what I call it. It's simple and small, I like to think. This is all you really need to use day to day to test your application with Webrat. Visiting and click link are about navigating pages. Fill in, check, choose, select, attach file, click button. Those are all about manipulating forms. There's a few other less common things in the Webrat code base, some of which I'll get into today and some of which I won't, but this is really the crux of it. So Webrat works with RSpec. This is a test that hits a page, the same test we saw before in RSpec. Previously, it was test unit. It also works with Shoulda. And finally, it works with Cucumber. So this is a simple scenario which hits that, exercises that code, and then you put Webrat in the step definitions. So if you've used Cucumber before, you might know it ships with some generic step definitions that map to a lot of common things like I click the button. There's just a reusable matcher for that, and it uses Webrat behind the scenes. But what I want to do right now is take a quick second to sort of dispel a common misconception, which is that Webrat and Cucumber must be used together. And in actuality, those things are orthogonal from a technical perspective. They work well together, and a lot of people use them together. I use them together like that personally. But you can use Webrat regardless of which testing framework you're using. I haven't heard of any testing framework that Webrat doesn't work with. But if you have one that you're making yourself or that you found, let me know, and we'll figure out how to do it. Because I don't want your testing framework of choice to be a barrier to getting started with Webrat. So more along the lines of what situations can I use this in? Webrat actually works with the three, I would say, leading Ruby web application frameworks of the day, Rails, Sinatra, and Merb. And it does that through an adapter layer, which we will talk about a little bit more coming up soon. You might have noticed that when I was filling in the field with Webrat, I actually referred to it by name with a capital N. And that is not an attribute on the input field in the DOM. It's actually a reference to the text in the label. So Webrat benefits from having good labels on each of your form fields. And as it turns out, so do your users, because by having good, appropriate labels on your form fields, you're benefiting accessibility and usability to begin with. So Webrat encourages you to do that, and it benefits from it. If you're not doing that, you can also reference fields by ID and name. But label, I would recommend, if in all cases where you can, is better. Also, there's the syntax, which is a little less common, but you can actually put an input inside a label, and that will do the right thing as well. You don't need to reference it by ID. So once you've navigated around your app and you've filled out some forms, you need to verify your behavior, right? You need to do assertions, essentially. But Webrat, behind the scenes, implicitly does a lot of assertions for you. And this is helpful as being a quick way to alert you if anything's gone wrong without needing to litter your code with a bunch of unrelated or tangential sort of assertions. So Webrat, anytime it makes a page request for you, will ensure that it's not in the 500 server error status code. It does that every time automatically. It also makes sure when you write that line, fill in name with rack test, that that field actually exists. So if for some reason you've got someone goes into your form helper, custom form helper code and breaks something so that the field's not there, Webrat will blow up as soon as you reference that field name. Once you've done that, you can also do assertions based on the HTML content. This code was actually imported from the MERB project. They were kind enough to bestow it on us, and we maintain it now. It does a few more things now than it did, but it was done like that in the interest of making it work across the entire Ruby web framework ecosystem, of which MERB is one part. Webrat tries to be at the center of that. So this stuff actually works in test unit as well. Unfortunately, this is one of those parts where I just can't bear to look at the test unit syntax. So I've showed this one in RSpec. But it should contain, that's basically looking at intertext. Should have selector. You can see here, it's looking for LI tags. It's looking for LI tags that have the class new, and it's making sure there's actually 2 of them. So count. So anything you put in the hash is basically an attribute on the element, except for count, which is special. And there's also another one for specifying the content of that if you want to do shorthand for that. And then finally, if you have to get into like the real crazy stuff, the real hard stuff, like XPath is there. You can do whatever you want. It goes through Nokogiri's XPath, which is actually based on libxml, so it's really good. And I try to avoid it when possible because it's not a very clean syntax, but the power is there when you need it. It's also worth noting that when you're using Webrat, you're not using it as an alternative to like Rails integration testing. You're using it on top of that. So if you want to do like one of those Rails integration testing methods, like put via redirect for one specific test or whatever, or one place in a test, you can do that, and then you can move on with Webrat before or after that or in separate tests. So you're not actually cutting yourself off from anything. So that's pretty important to us as well. In terms of verifying content, this is sort of the most complicated example I've got. If you're looking at a photo album that you're rendering for some reason, you might look at the, in this case, 3rd image in the album, and you're going to check that it's actually an image tag to the right place on your server, because your server's serving those up for you, and that it's also captioned properly. So when things go wrong, Webrat offers a function, little known, but very useful, called save and open page. You can see in the URL bar, it's actually going to write out the HTML of the current response body into a place in your project's temp directory. And then if you're on Windows or Mac, it will pop that open in Firefox or whatever is your default browser. And it actually goes through a little bit of work to try to rewrite your CSS and image paths to be absolute to the disk, so it will actually look correct. But this is invaluable when you've got something where you're like, this field should be here, but it's not there. What the hell is going on? Where am I in my app? I don't know. So save and open page is a great way to do that. So I talked about adapters. There are 5 adapters currently in the Webrat code base that we maintain right now. 3 of them are Ruby web application frameworks, Rails, MERB, Sinatra, and then we've also got 2 which are not dependent on Ruby web application frameworks. There's Selenium and Mechanize. And we're going to take a look at those right now. So Mechanize uses the awesome Mechanize gem that is available on RubyForge. And it uses that under the hood to allow you to use the Webrat syntax to manipulate a website that's anywhere. So this is Webrat testing Google or exercising Google. In this case, it's actually scraping Google. So if you need to write a Google scraper, this is how you could do it in 9 lines of Webrat. And this is the results. So a little more interesting than Mechanize, although Mechanize is really cool because I know people who are actually writing tests in Webrat for PHP applications and Java applications that they are migrating over to Ruby, giant applications like page by page, and they're using that API, and they won't have to change their API when they get fully over to Ruby and can do it in process, which is a little bit faster. So Selenium, a lot of people are interested in this. Webrat started, it was not a solution for Selenium. It was actually an alternative to Selenium. I'm not a huge fan of Selenium for like using it for everything. I think that is not necessarily the most efficient way to preserve your sanity when testing your application. It's not very fast, and it's got the dependency on the browser. It takes a long time to get started, and then you're subject to a lot of environmental dependencies. But it is also the only way to test your JavaScript. So the thinking behind the creation of Webrat was that, well, we don't have that much JavaScript that is that important. We really just need to know that our Ruby is working. What's the best way we can test our Ruby application from a full stack? And let's just deal with the JavaScript later. Well, we got to later, and we're like, OK, well, now we're adding some JavaScript to our sign-up form. It would be really good to make sure that that's not breaking it for the end user as well. So with Webrat Selenium support, you can write your Webrat test and run it in the process with just Ruby involved. And then later, as your application evolves, you can start using Selenium without having to rewrite everything. And you don't need to make that decision up front. So that's something that I think Webrat offers that no other testing framework does right now. So this is how you take a Webrat tested app and you run the tests in Selenium. Transactional fixtures don't work with Selenium because it's running in a different process. So if all you do is begin and then roll back a transaction, it's never actually seen from the test process. It's never seen in the Selenium process. That doesn't work, so you need to turn that off. And then you need to tell Rails where the host is going to be, so it knows how to generate its links properly across your site. And then you might have remembered this Webrat.configure block from one of my first slides. It used to say Rails, now it says Selenium. And that's the key piece. So once you've done that, what happens? When you run your test now, Webrat will automatically boot a Selenium RC server on port 4444. That's the actual Java jar file, which is currently in the Webrat gem. It's big, I know, we'll get it out of there, but it's currently in there, so it's easy to get started with, at least, if it not takes a while to download the gem. So don't do that on the Wi-Fi. Next, it starts up a Rails application server on port 3001, so you can keep your dev server running on 3000, but that'll run in test mode. And then it runs your tests. So how does this work? Webrat Selenium talks, is the Ruby portion that talks to, with the help of the Selenium client gem, which I don't maintain. It's sort of like the way to talk to a Selenium process from Ruby. So we use that, and we talk to the Selenium RC server, which is the Java component of this, which actually then talks to a browser. You can use Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari. And that's sort of the path of commands through the system. So one thing that's really cool that I like about this is if you have a concept like uploading a file, which is actually something your application does, and it needs to be implemented two different ways depending on if you're running in a browser with JavaScript or if you're running without JavaScript. We do our file uploads with a third-party web service, so it's not just like a file field. You can write a method like upload photo and then use these webrat.simulate and webrat.automate blocks, which will switch flow control based on what mode you're running in. So simulate is the traditional Webrat style. Automate is the term I use for automating an actual browser. So if you're running in Selenium mode, this block never runs. And if you're running in traditional Webrat simulation mode, this block never runs. So they just have different definitions of the same method to either yield or skip. And so, you can see we've got a couple different, this is how we upload a file two different ways. And then from our tests, we actually run some tests in both modes, and this is how we accommodate that. So also, when you're using Webrat, it doesn't, again, it doesn't prevent you from doing anything you could do otherwise. So like I alluded to the Selenium client gem, that's exposed as the Selenium object, and you can use it in your tests as needed. So this test starts, and it does the Webrat API to navigate to the appropriate page. And then you want to do something that Webrat just doesn't have an API for, like dragging and dropping an image to reorder it. You can just drop down to the Selenium object and do that. It's not going to prevent you from using any of those basic Selenium commands. So the one caution I'll give is that automating a real browser is slow. Again, like I created Webrat because I thought the barrier to entry to doing these sort of full stack integration tests was too high when you had to start like on day one and run everything through Selenium. So what I would encourage you to do, if you're like most applications which are using JavaScript to enhance some specific features, is start with the simulated stuff and then start to move into the automated stuff as you need it. I wouldn't recommend you just start with the automated stuff, although it will work if you desire to do it that way. And actually, one consequence of this style that we found, one emergent principle, is that it encourages you to write your application with unobtrusive JavaScript. So if you write your application so you have to write JavaScript and you have to have JavaScript to do any of the important functions, like let's say sign up, then you have to write all your tests through Selenium. But if you provide a sign-up experience which might not be exactly the same, but it works without JavaScript, then you're able to run your tests through that path, and that actually can benefit your users too, because if their Selenium or if their JavaScript isn't working, or you have a syntax error in your JavaScript, the app doesn't fall apart. It is still usable. So I'm going to do a quick demo. If I can get my screen to show up. Turn on mirroring. OK, so Ryan Bates actually did a screencast, a Rails cast on Webrat, and it was so good that I just decided I would use his project tree for the demo. So you should definitely check that out. What I've got here, let me show you the code first. This is just a simple Rails app that handles authentication. And we've got two tests, one for logging in with a valid username and password, and one for logging in with an invalid username and password. And if you run rake test integration, you'll see that it will run these tests and produce a result, which should be passing. And it did that without Selenium. Now what I'm going to do is go into the test helper, and all I'm going to do is change this symbol right here from Selenium, or from Rails to Selenium. And I'm going to go back to the console, and I'm going to run the same test. And if I don't get bit by the demo rule, this will work. So it starts up the Selenium RC Java server, automatically boots up a Rails application server automatically. Right now, it's probably trying to boot up Firefox. Give it a second. I can tell jokes. OK. So you see in the background, bring it forward. Oh, so the one piece that I missed, this is important, is you need to configure Rails to know where your Selenium server is. So I'll give that one more shot. Yeah, the source code for the test. Oh, yeah. So this is the test helper. The lines that I changed, I just uncommented this. So you're telling it that your links should be generated to point to localhost 3001. And then I changed the mode. So that worked. We got two tests. Switching back to slides, I've got one more thing to cover. OK. So as developers in the Ruby web space, we love Rack, or I think we should love Rack, because it provides a standard that we can all get behind and share a lot of code and concepts. And Webrat loves Rack as well. So what I wrote, with the help of a lot of help, actually, from the MERB request helpers, is a little library called Rack Test. And all it does is gives you a quick way to issue low-level requests to any Rack-compatible Ruby application. So this works if you write it in Sinatra, MERB, Rails, if you just write a bare Rack app yourself because you need to be really fast. All of the time, whenever you're doing that, you need to be able to test it quickly. So there's really a lot of concepts that are shared between all of the frameworks for being able to exercise this in a test mode. You need to maintain a fake session store. The browser usually does that. Now we need to do it. You need to be able to handle redirects. You need to be able to handle HTTP authentication for some use cases. So I was noticing that Sinatra and MERB and Rails and Ramaze, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, all duplicated this code. And you actually couldn't write a test that hit all of those different applications, which I thought was a big problem. It's also a really big problem if you think about it conceptually, because there's no such thing as a Rails app anymore. Like, what does that mean? I might have a Rails app, and it's got a Metal, which is a Sinatra app, and I want to make a request to it. There's like multiple layers of routing that are going on, and I don't know what's actually going to be the termination point, which library that's going to be. So I think like looking at an integration test and having a concept that's like, what's the last controller that rendered, is sort of a conceptual flaw, because there might not be a controller. You might have written something in rack to pick up that portion of your application. You shouldn't have to rewrite everything when you do. So rack tests API is very simple. You can do the HTTP verbs. Request is just a generic, very basic way to issue any request with any rack env you want to provide in. You can follow redirects. You can do some header manipulation, HTTP authorization. And it keeps track in the object of the last request that was issued and the last response that was returned. So I talked about before, there's Webrat adapters. We've got 3 of them for Ruby web application frameworks. And you can now start to see my evil plan evolving. The goal is to get Merb, Sinatra, Ramaz, anyone who's doing a Ruby web application framework to use rack test as their basic testing API. We've actually got a lot of support for that. Merb's going to do it, I can say. Sinatra is going to do it, I can say. Rails is very likely going to do it, and Ramaz has already done it. So this is going to be the standard for low-level API for issuing requests. And then Webrat, I get to simplify my life in the end, because all I need to do is support rack test as the API. And I no longer have to maintain framework-specific adapters for anything that supports rack. So this is where I'm headed. These are the 3 adapters that I'd like to focus on for the foreseeable future. The Rails one will stay around, but I want to start working on this. And actually, the prototype of it I got working on the plane here. That's the announcement of the day. And so I want to focus a lot of effort on that, and hopefully there'll be a lot of work coming out of that in the near future. One last plug. I am co-author of the RSpec book, which is out in beta and is coming out in dead tree form very soon. It's got 2 chapters on Webrat, one of which is in the beta, which is all the traditional stuff, and the second one, which is coming soon, as soon as I get back from this conference, is about Webrat plus Selenium. These are Flickr photo credits. Thank you very much for having me. I will take questions until Josh throws me off the stage. Okay. Okay. Yes, please.
So, one problem I had with Webrat is when you have several items on the page named the same, several links named the same. So how do I overcome that?
So Webrat actually has a method which I didn't cover. It's called within. Oh, sorry. The question was, I've got multiple links on the page with the same text. For example, like edit links inside a table where it's repeated over and over again. Webrat actually has a feature I didn't cover called within, which lets you pass it a CSS selector, and then within the block body, all of your Webrat form manipulation commands and link clicking and everything like that is scoped to things that are in that element. So you can do it with within. Yes?
Does Webrat have any support for checking the HTML validity and things like that?
It doesn't. We have, so the question was, does Webrat have any support for checking HTML validity or XHTML validity? It doesn't have any support for that. I would consider that probably outside of the scope of the core of Webrat, although since we've now, like on our project, built up a large suite of Webrat-based tests, we have talked about and entertained the idea of just starting to capture those HTML responses, save them off, and then like at night make sure that we're still validating. I think I can do maybe one more. Yes.
So you mentioned save and open page and zip file really quickly. So I just wanted to ask, where does that happen and where does it save to?
Okay, so the question was, where does save an open page happen and where does it save the file? So it's not something you're going to want to write in your test and commit. It's just for when you're doing debugging. It will save it inside the Rails temp directory in a file called Webrat and then a timestamp. So then it will pop that open, and it will also tell you where it is. So, yeah, Chad?
So the Selenium client has some cool stuff like taking screenshots while your tests are running and like making you do it earlier. So you have plans to expose some of that stuff through Webrat?
Yes. The question was, Selenium client provides some cool things like being able to take a screen grab and save that out so you can actually look at a picture of the application you're testing. Webrat has save an open screen grab now for use in Selenium mode only, which will do just that. And we're interested in adding any more stuff like that. So if you've got cool tips, we'll incorporate what makes sense. Thank you.